All right. Here is Clark, splashing home a three from way downtown. Some words with the Connecticut bench.
There are moments in sports that stop everything, moments where the noise in the building shifts from one kind of electricity to a completely different one, where 10,000 people who came to a game wanting to see one outcome walk out having witnessed something music they will describe to people for the rest of their lives. Moments that end arguments, silence doubters, and rewrite the terms of the conversation permanently. What Caitlyn Clark did on that court was every single one of those things compressed into 40 minutes of basketball that nobody in that building expected and nobody who saw it will ever forget. 51 points, 13 assists, 10 rebounds, a triple-double from a player. The home crowd spent the first quarter booing. From a player the critics had spent months calling overhyped, overexposed, boring, and undeserving of the attention she was getting. The boos started before she had even broken a sweat. They ended with a standing ovation that the building did not plan to give and could not hold back. Why do you think Caitlyn Clark keeps performing at her absolute best when the crowd is against her? Drop your answer in the comments right now, because what this woman does under pressure is something that needs to be talked about, and we are going to get into every single detail of how that night went down. Forbes does not mess around when it comes to evaluating athletic dominance. Their methodology for ranking the most powerful women in sports runs through proprietary weighted formulas, verified commercial valuations, broadcast revenue contributions, social engagement rates adjusted for authentic reach on and market expansion data that most sports economists take to compile. And when Forbes ran those numbers across every female athlete on the planet and published their findings, Caitlyn Clark came back as a name that the data would not stop pushing to the top. In 1 year, one single professional season, she had accomplished commercially and culturally what most athletes spend entire careers trying to build toward. But here is what the rankings and the revenue figures and the broadcast records do not fully capture, and what no spreadsheet can quantify. They do not capture what she looks like when a building full of people who do not want her to succeed turns the volume all the way up against her, and she answers with the greatest individual performance of her young professional career. The numbers tell you she is dominant. That night showed you she is something rarer than dominant. She is mentally indestructible. To understand what 51 points and a triple-double in a hostile arena actually means, you first need to understand what she was walking into when she stepped on that court. The city had been loud about its feelings all week. Local media had been running the narrative that Clark was a product of hype, that her numbers were inflated by weak competition, that the Indiana Fever success had been overstated, that the WNBA viewership explosion around her games was a media creation rather than a genuine organic phenomenon. By the time tip-off arrived, the building had absorbed a full week of that energy, and the crowd was ready to prove the point live and in real time. The boos when her name was announced in the starting lineup were not light. Years, they were committed. They were the kind of boos that have weight behind them, that carry intention, designed to get into a player's head and stay there. Most players hear that sound and something changes in them even if they would never admit it. Something tightens, something gets careful, the decision-making gets half a step slower, the shot selection gets half a degree more conservative. Caitlyn Clark heard those boos and did something that made the coaching staff on the opposing bench exchange a very specific look. She smiled and then she went to work. The first quarter of a road game in a hostile building against a defense that has had an entire week of film study to prepare for you is always the most dangerous stretch. The crowd is at maximum volume. The home team comes out with maximum energy, and the visiting player, who is the main target of all that hostility, has to make a decision very quickly about who she's gonna be for the next 40 minutes. Clark made that decision on the first possession of the game. She received the ball at the top of the arc, 30 feet from the basket, with a defender who had clearly been coached to get right up into her space the moment she touched it. The defender did exactly that. Closed hard, got into her before she could settle, and Clark took exactly one hard dribble to her left, stepped back 2 steps to create the room she needed, and released a 3-point attempt from 28 feet that went through the net without touching the rim. The building went quiet for about 3 seconds. Then the booing resumed louder. She had heard it so many times by now that it had stopped registering as a threat and started registering as a feedback. She was making the right decisions. She kept making them. By halftime, she had 23 points, 7 assists, and 4 rebounds. The triple-double was already mathematically in reach, and the defense had no answer for it because the threat she presented came from too many directions at once. When the coverage collapsed to take away her 3-point look, she was finally finding cutters in the lane before the rotation could recover. When the defense played her to pass, she was pulling up from the mid-range or going all the way to the rim. When they brought a second defender to take the ball out of her hands, she was moving it to the open teammate so quickly that the advantage was already converted before the help defense could get organized. The box score at halftime looked like the kind of numbers that end up in record books. 23 points in 20 minutes of basketball against a defense that was specifically, deliberately, exhaustively prepared to limit exactly that kind of production. The coaching staff on the Indiana side was not surprised. The coaching staff on the home side was doing a lot of board erasing and rewriting between the quarters. The third quarter is where great performances become legendary ones. It is the stretch of the game where energy dips are supposed to happen. Best, where the momentum can swing against a visiting player who has already spent enormous energy fighting the crowd. Where a team that is down at halftime can claw back into the game by making the road environment feel impossible. Clark went for 16 points in the third quarter. 16. She scored on a pull-up 3 from the logo that answered a home team run that had briefly cut the deficit to 6. She scored on a driving layup through contact that she converted and then hit the free throw on the and one to turn a 2-point play into 3. She had a sequence in the middle of the third where she scored or assisted on 5 consecutive Fever possessions without a turnover or a miss, and the building, which had been loud and hostile for 2.5 quarters, started to go through something that crowds only go through when they are watching something genuinely historic happen in real time. The booing was thinning, not from approval, from shock, from the involuntary recognition that the thing they had come here to prevent was not going to be prevented, and that they were going to have to sit with the memory of having been here for it. No WNBA player had ever touched 50 points in a road game in league history before that night. The record going in was 47, set by a player whose name had been attached to that number for 8 years, a number that felt safe precisely because the game conditions that produce 50-point performances from a visiting player in a hostile arena are conditions that almost never align. You need the shots to fall on, you need the defense to keep making the mistakes that create the shots. You need the conditioning to maintain that level of production across 4 full quarters. You need the mental composure to keep making clear decisions under a level of crowd noise and physical defensive attention that is designed to make you stop doing the things that made you dangerous in the first place. Caitlyn Clark needed all of those things to align at the same time, and they did because she made them align, because she is the kind of player who does not wait for conditions to be favorable. She makes the conditions irrelevant. The 51st point came in the fourth quarter with 4 minutes left on a step back 3 from the right wing that went in off the back of the backboard, bounced up Art, and fell through the net in a way that seemed to summarize the entire night. The kind of shot that has no business going in. The kind of shot that goes in for Caitlyn Clark because she is Caitlyn Clark, and at a certain point the degree of difficulty stops mattering. The arena did something interesting after that shot. There was a pause, a collective intake of breath, and then something that had not happened all night long started at the back of the upper bowl and moved forward. A section of the home crowd started clapping, not for the Fever, not for Indiana, for the shot, for the performance, for what they were watching, for the uncomfortable truth that the player they had spent the entire night booing had just put on a show that their own building was not going to be able to pretend it had not witnessed. By the time the final buzzer sounded, the standing ovation was not a polite gesture. It was a full building on its feet because some moments are too large for tribalism to contain. 51 points, 13 assists, 10 rebounds. That is not a stat line from a video game. That is not a simulation. That is not a college game against an undermanned opponent on a friendly court in front of a home crowd. That is a road game in a building where the crowd spent the first 3 minutes trying to rattle her with sound alone, against a defense that had a full week of preparation and a coaching staff that knew exactly what she wanted to do and built their entire defensive scheme around taking it away from her. She did it anyway. She did it in 40 minutes of basketball that will be the answer to trivia questions for the next 20 years. She did it in front of 10,000 people who showed up to see her fail and stayed to applaud something they did not plan on witnessing. The numbers do not lie. Forbes ran the methodology, compiled the proprietary weighted valuations, measured the broadcast revenue contributions and the authentic engagement rates and the market expansion data, and the numbers kept pointing at the same name. But the night she scored 51 in a road building building that booed her when she was announced is the night that the numbers became a story. A story about a player who is not just commercially dominant or statistically dominant, but mentally dominant in a way that the sport has not seen in a very long time. A player who hears the noise and uses it. A player who needs the pressure the way other athletes need the absence of it. A player who smiles at the boos and then gives the building something to talk about forever. The Indiana Fever are building something real around this player. The roster around her is strong. The system is designed to maximize what she does best, and the front office has shown the willingness to keep investing in the pieces that make her dangerous. But beyond the team and beyond the season-by-season trajectory, there is the larger story of what Caitlyn Clark means to women's professional basketball as an institution. The viewership numbers that her games produce, the sponsorship dollars that follow those viewers, the young players who are growing up watching her perform and deciding that the WNBA is where they want to be, the arenas that sell out now that were not selling out before she arrived, all of it connects back to the same source. It connects back to a player who accomplishes in 1 year what most athletes spend entire careers trying to build toward, who drives revenue beyond her own earnings and into the broader ecosystem of the sport, who reaches demographics that had never seriously engaged with women's basketball before and converts them into fans who buy tickets and tune in and care about what happens next. Forbes saw it in the data. The crowd in that road building saw it in real time, and 51 points later, they gave her a standing ovation that nobody planned and nobody could stop because some performances are too large for any building to contain. This is just the beginning. She is 22 years old. She has 2 professional seasons behind her, and the peak years of her career still ahead. The record she broke that night will be challenged by the record she has not set yet. The performances that are already legendary will be joined by performances we have not seen yet in arenas we have not imagined yet against defenses that have not been built yet. The Caitlyn Clark era is not reaching a peak. It is still in the early stages of a climb that has no visible ceiling. Drop a comment below and tell us which moment from that 51-point night gave you the biggest chills, because we want to know and we read every single one. If you are not subscribed yet, hit that button right now, because the next chapter of this story is going to be worth watching and you do not want to come in late. Like the video, turn on all notifications, and we will see you in the next one. The thing about Caitlyn Clark that the highlight clips capture and the stat lines confirm, but neither one fully explains, is the consistency of it. A 51-point road performance is extraordinary. One legendary game is something special players produce once or twice in a career when everything lines up perfectly. What Clark does is produce at an elite level, not just when everything lines up, but when it does not. When the defense is prepared, when the crowd is hostile, when the conditions are designed to make the output impossible. She averaged over 19 points and over 8 assists per game across her entire rookie season. 19 points and 8 assists per game is a number that would lead most teams and challenge the league leaders in both categories simultaneously, and she did it across a full season of games. Not a hot stretch, not a favorable schedule block, the whole thing. Then she came back in year 2 and the numbers went up. The 3-point percentage improved, the assist to turnover ratio tightened, the fourth quarter production in close games increased. She added dimensions to her game that scouts and analysts had identified as areas for growth, and she grew in exactly those directions over an offseason, which is what great players do and what good players often cannot. The trajectory is not flattening, it is still climbing. The financial picture around her confirms what the performance data shows. The Nike deal, structured not as a standard endorsement agreement, but as a signature line with revenue sharing, puts her in commercial company that the league has never seen before. The structure Nike gave her is the structure they reserve for athletes at the very top of their sport, the kind of arrangement that reflects not just what a player has already achieved, but what they project a player becoming over a decade-long career. When Nike builds a signature line and attaches revenue sharing to it, they are making a long-term bet on a player's trajectory, and the trajectory they are betting on with Caitlyn Clark is one that goes up for a very long time. The Gatorade deal sits in the same category, record-breaking for a female athlete when it was signed, a number that reflects the authentic reach she has across demographics that the brand had historically tried to access through NFL and NBA stars. She reaches those demographics, and she reaches them in ways that feel genuine rather than manufactured, because the appeal is not constructed, it is earned. It is the natural result of watching a player compete the way she competes and win the way she wins and perform under pressure the way she performs. People who had never watched a WNBA game before Clark arrived started watching because of her and discovered a sport they now genuinely care about. That is not a marketing achievement, that is a cultural one, and it is worth more than any single endorsement figure can capture. Yeah, the